Today's networks are changing fast, and employees, devices, and infrastructures are more distributed than ever. Gigamon Threat Insight is a cloud-native, high-velocity network detection and response solution that's purpose-built to enable you to get in front of this transformation. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Gigamon. Enterprises struggle to detect advanced attacks quickly and thoroughly as evolving threats continue to evade current security tools. Skillful threat detection starts with diverse, high-value security telemetry to run detections on. The Chronicle platform allows security teams to store and analyze petabytes of data in one place so that you can quickly apply powerful detection rules against all of your security data. Learn more about the Chronicle platform and the latest threat detection capabilities at securityweekly.com/Chronicle. Cybercriminals are opportunistically targeting industries that continue to operate full tilt during the coronavirus shutdowns, and their attacks have grown more sophisticated. Given this shifting landscape, taking the appropriate countermeasures becomes paramount. Mimecast Email Security 3.0 helps you evolve from a perimeter-based security strategy to one that is comprehensive and pervasive with cyber resiliency in mind. From the company that stops at nothing to block cyber threats, Mimecast is offering a fully featured 90-day web security service. Visit securityweekly.com/Mimecast to learn more. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. In partnership with the Cyber Risk Alliance, we are excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked on December 10th, 2020. The inaugural edition of Security Weekly Unlocked also celebrates Security Weekly's 15-year anniversary and will feature talks from Ron and Cindy Gula, Kevin Finisterre, Vivek Ramachandran, and many, many more. The agenda is live. Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to register for this completely free event. This segment is sponsored by Vicarious. To learn more about Vicarious solutions, please visit securityweekly.com/Vicarious. Joining us today from Vicarious is co-founder and CEO Michael Assraf and advisor Clayton Fields to talk about sharpening CVSS and asset context. Clayton and Michael, welcome to the show.
Hey, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
Nice to have you both on the show today. I wanted to start by talking about how subjective it is to prioritize and remediate your vulnerabilities. I think we've done a great job in collaboration with Vicarious in really, truly defining just how subjective that is. And I think today we're going to focus a little more on how we make this less subjective and get to actually fixing and remediating the problems that matter for us.
Yeah, I think we should look back at the process, how it began, and the process began with, and it still is, with a huge CVE report that has one attribute which states what's the risk. This attribute is not connected to the infrastructure of any company or organization. It's a completely external data that is coming from the outside and allows us to have certain sense of understanding of what's the criticality of this vulnerability, but it's completely subjective, as you said. It's something that is coming from the outside. It's not related to your environment or to the way you execute software or you configure software on your asset. The second generation was to understand what's the importance of a certain asset on the business context, on the business wise. For example, this is a computer that holds a database application. This computer is a web server that communicates with the DMZ, and then you're putting a weight on it once you calculate the risk score of a certain CV based on manual work that someone went and tagged a certain asset and said, okay, this asset is database, so it's probably more critical to focus on right now. This is what we call Gen 2, again, completely subjective. And now with the progression of this market, we're starting to see more and more solutions that at least try to add objective and machine-generated data that is being collected from the execution of assets, of apps on assets. And this data is being generated on a continuous manner, meaning that it's all the times being generated and it's completely automatic. It's not something that some guy from the IT, some analyst or some security professional went ahead and tagged a certain asset. Is something that is being done in a completely automatic and autonomous way. And of course, this is happening on a real-time manner, meaning that if something changes in the network, if some computer is starting to communicate with the DMZ or starting to do activity with privilege that it doesn't necessarily need, it will automatically alert declines, and this is what we're trying to take the market, because what we're saying is something that is very clear. Subjectivity doesn't equal exploitability. A hacker doesn't care if a certain computer is the CEO computer or the I don't know, the some clerk in the bank. It doesn't really matter. If there's a way in, if there's an open window, an open door, he will go in. So subjectivity is not related to exploitability in any way.
Yeah, and Clayton, that was something you were mentioning too, that we got in this habit of prioritizing and remediating based on all the things that we have relied on in the past, but that's not how attackers think. That's not how attackers are looking at this problem. We're looking at it differently from attackers, and that's dangerous.
I think Vicarious brings that red team perspective to the vulnerability management process. And if you look at the way most companies are managing vulnerability today, they're trying to take into some account threat intelligence, likelihood of exploitability, or if a POC exists for a particular attack, but also the risk and compliance folks, telling the business, hey, these are your important assets. These are the ones you have to focus on. And we know from studying lateral movement and how pervasive Active Directory is that if you're trying to stop an attacker from taking your crown jewels, they don't always start on the crown jewels. They start where the easiest method to enter the environment is, and they start with the easiest method to gain privilege and persistencies. And if we know that this is how the attackers think, then it's completely opposite the risk management approach that most compliance groups have, because what they're doing is prioritizing based on the business and not how the attacker sees their network. So Vicarious is definitely bringing third generation strategy to vulnerability management and offering that red team point of view to the process to say, look, we've got to be looking at the endpoints and the privileges and the likelihood of exploitation of the endpoints, whether they're connected to the internet or not, how often they connect to the internet, what applications connect to the internet, what applications may be used on a regular basis by the users, which may be subject to exploitation more frequently than others, so that we can drive better prioritization that is not subjective. It's clearly based on the attack path. It's clearly based on the probability of success and the lateral movement that the attacker can use to get to the asset. So yeah,
and I love this
really
because sorry, Clay, it reminds me of a story, because basically you've created the virtual Mike Poor. And what I mean by that is I have this story that sticks out in my mind. I don't know if you know Mike, but Mike is just a wonderful person, one of my favorite people in the world. And Mike is very much a showman. If you know Mike, he's super, super smart, knows his stuff inside out and backwards, but he's very much a showman. And he described this time when he was consulting with an organization, and they had printed out this kind of map of all of their systems and data of the network and systems, and they were asking Mike to review it. And Mike, of course, being the showman, kind of walks up to the table, looks down, kind of strokes his beard, and looks at it, and basically points out, like, what's that? Kind of drops his pen, like right on the first starting point of what would be the likely attack path into the network. Now, people like Mike can look at that diagram and point out those attack paths, but I think if most enterprise defenders and teams were to look at that diagram, they would go, oh, my most critical assets are here, so we need to make sure we apply all the patches and remediation right here. But someone like Mike that has that attacker mindset and knows architecture and systems as well can point out those other attack paths. And I really believe that Vicarious is offering us a way to be able to identify those other attack paths and help prioritize those to help protect your data, and not what we traditionally think would protect it at most. Oh, sorry, Clayton, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, we believe that a high-risk vulnerability, something that should be remediated quickly, has several attributes. It has the ability to expose privilege. It has the ability to expose access. It may be connected to the internet. It may have a current POC. It may be currently talked about on social media or in the dark web, where attackers are strategizing on how to exploit the vulnerability. And we see evidence of this today. There's quite frequently daily alerts on scanning activity in the internet, where adversaries are looking for these open doors that are exposed to the internet. And often, because companies don't have a great view of the activity on the endpoint, they may not know the specific asset inventory. They may not know the likelihood that the asset may be connected to the internet. They may not know the utilization of applications or privileges on the endpoints. So I think that as we evolve vulnerability management, it has to have a purple team perspective. We have to bring, blue and red together the same way we've done with other security operations, and we have to drive that behavior in the vulnerability management strategy.
Yeah. Adrian, I want to give this over to you. I know you haven't briefed with the Vicarious team, but I'm really curious on what questions you have in your assessment of the what we're talking about.
Yeah, so actually, I've got a long background here with these types of tools, and spent a lot of time in vulnerability management, both from a pen tester perspective, and what you choose to include in the report, and how you prioritize what you tell the customer, and also from the enterprise side, dealing with hundreds of thousands or millions of vulnerabilities churned out, by the big three scanners over the years. And actually worked for a company in the prioritization space, in the vulnerability prioritization space, and worked on their sales and marketing, and some product management. So very familiar with the space, and I'm curious. I don't want to get too into weeds with my questions, but I do like the idea of tagging. But talking about the context, one of the pieces that seemed really tough. And we saw companies like Red Seal, and others go after the attack path portion of it, but then maybe didn't do as good a job in other places. They would actually connect to your network infrastructure and try and work that out. And don't have any direct experience with those tools, but never heard anybody shouting, "Yeah, these guys have really figured it out." But curious how you get to that information, how much work has to be put into the product, like, asset criticality, are we manually entering that as well, and how, how you come to a common score with that, or are you just attaching tags and letting people, the query of the day, basically, like, hey, let's look at everything that is exposed to the internet, and that's one report or one query, versus, on a different day, you might be concerned about something else, and you can, kind of shake up your list, reprioritize your list.
Yeah, so we take all those attributes, red team attributes, and provide the correlation automatically for the customer. So Vicarious is focused on consolidating all the steps of vulnerability management. So in that, you have asset inventory, you have prioritization, you have remediation, you have compensating controls for things that you can't patch. The vulnerability management process is pretty long. And within that process, you see 5, 6, 7, 8 different tools. So the first thing we're focused on is consolidating all that down. There's no reason we should have 3, 4, 5, 6 tools in a particular process. So we want to provide one solution that touches all these different areas that can be as automated as the customer's demand. And that automation is shown in the asset inventory phase, where all the data about the endpoints is gathered automatically. It's shown in the prioritization phase, where all of that data that's collected is then correlated against this red team perspective and offering the customer a path to vulnerability remediation. And then including in that platform all of the things that the customer would need to remediate those vulnerabilities. So I think, offering an all-in-one solution gives the solution a broader perspective than the individual tools that exist today. When you buy 3, 4, and 5 tools and you try to make a process out of them, they're not all going to be as informed as they could be. Whereas when you consolidate all that information into one place and eliminate the technical debt that's associated with that process, your tools become smarter, and you can use new technologies in those tools at a much, much lower price. Adrian,
but a higher return, because you do require an agent be installed on the endpoint, but I get a really high return value on that, because at Clayton, as you said, that gives me the asset inventory, what applications are running on there. It gives me the opportunity to patch the operating system in those applications, and it provides the ability to give me some remediation above and beyond patching with the patchless solution, correct?
Yes, I mean, where somebody may have 3-4 agents today, we're consolidating that down into one agent. And so we are focused on using that one agent more effectively, where today we see customers with multiple agents overlapping each other. And I think that's where the pain in the agent conversation comes from.
Yep.
So if we can help people consolidate that down and make better use of that resource, then we consider that a win at Vicarious.
Does that help answer your question, Adrian? So I've spent a lot of time with the Vicarious team, as you can tell.
Yeah. I mean, it's something, I think for all of the prioritization vendors, the math starts getting a little complicated, because there's so many things, there's so much context to pull in, matching stuff up with available exploits that are out there, where the system is on the network, how it's exposed, who has access to it. There's, as I think they've made clear already, there's a ton of stuff that you can weigh in on when calculating that.
Yeah, and Michael, you and I have had talked about does the exploit exist as just one measurement, and the kind of, I think, overemphasis that we collectively, solution providers and enterprises, put on yes, an exploit exists. That's just but one factor in your system, and I think you've created a lot of other great data points that can lead people down paths to much better remediation.
Yeah, and I think we're also it's also backed up by NIST and the vulnerability listing. Like even in the vulnerability listing, you have the attack vector, which implies what's required for this vulnerability to get exploited. So if you have a vulnerability with an active exploit, and let's say that this exploit is publicly available, it's listed on ExploitDB or any other exploit database, it might not have the attributes to be exploited on a certain computer. And this is exactly what we are trying to figure out. The fact that you have an exploit is just a static attributes with no connection to how you execute the software that this vulnerability is running on. So again, it's something subjective that is coming from the outside. It's not specifically relevant for our environment, but overall, we're trying to make use of 3 data points. The first data point is the threat, and the threat can be either the CVE. We have some other threats that we're doing. We're also doing binary analysis in order to predict threats, but that's one part. It's one data point because threat is a static thing that you have either on an operating system or in a third-party app. The second thing is the machine-generated data that Clayton talked about before. We're generating a lot of information and attach it to the asset inventory, which is the third data point. And as we can see the market today, most of the vulnerability assessment tools will provide you a very big report with the hosts and the assets that this vulnerability is running on. But because they're not, like some of them are not tied into the asset inventory process, it's very hard to understand the remediation in the context of, okay, I'm running a certain version of an app, I need to mitigate it, or I'm running a certain operating system KB, and I need to install this upgrade to my Linux servers, etc. So these 3 data points, the machine-generated data, the asset inventory, and the threat, allows you to complete the process and to see the big picture of what is the vulnerability and how can it get exploited in your specific asset. And you can have a certain vulnerability that has an exploit. It's running on 2 different computers. On one computer, it's completely vulnerable, completely exploitable, completely critical for you to handle. On the other one, it's not. It's critical. Of course, you should mitigate it, but maybe it should wait until you have some more time and for later on your remediation program.
And one of the data points that I really like is the usage, application usage. And I love this in the context of a browser because we've seen a lot of browser-based vulnerabilities. And yeah, let's say the exploit is for Firefox, and you look across your asset inventory in Vicarious, and I've seen this in the product, they can show you that Chrome is the one getting used 95% of the time, and Firefox isn't. So that speaks to how I prioritize. But now I can also make decisions. Why do they need Firefox on there too? Maybe I remove it from those systems and focus more on patching and remediation in Chrome.
For example, a common use case there, like what you're describing, Paul, is a web developer might need multiple browsers for validating the website that they're working on, the code that they're writing. But the one that they actually use for touching the internet, might be Chrome, and the others are just for doing unit testing or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Vicarious would be able to pick up on all those individual attributes and correlate based off them. And that's how we refine that CVSS score. That's why we chose the title Sharpening CVSS, because, CVSS does require some temporal environmental attributes be added into the equation. And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but the clients we talk to, they don't have time for that Excel sheet, right? To go through thousands of endpoints and figure out, what is the temporal and environmental impact to the CVSS score, and how am I supposed to prioritize this? Most people are at that point shooting in the dark. So machine generated data can solve all these problems. We can pull all that data from the endpoint. We can correlate that data, provide the contextual knowledge to the CVSS ranking. And then, Paul, like we showed on the game on the last show we were on, something with a high CVSS score, it may actually be much lower for the customer, depending on how they're actually using it. And for a customer to figure that out across their entire environment with new challenges like COVID, where the people are working from home, they're not coming into the office, they're not behind the firewall, they're not getting hit by the network scanner. You've got an extreme number of mobile users now, probably bigger populations than we've ever had in history. And customers are telling us that, those users are requiring admin privileges at home. And how are we supposed to keep up with what software is being added to those systems, what new vulnerabilities are being introduced to those systems while these users are at home? So this is where, again, removing the technical debt and having the agent, we can track that machine no matter where it goes. We can offer all of the vulnerability management processes against that machine no matter where it is. As long as it can hit the public internet over SSL, we're going to be able to communicate with it. And so especially in today's environment, these are all big wins for reducing attack surface.
Also, what I like to, and this was a threat model that I went through recently, and I actually presented to Michael and Clayton, is let's say our attackers, as we just learned, that it was originally called Iran, then it was Russia in attribution. Doesn't matter. My threat model is I've got users that I know are using a browser that may succumb to phishing attacks, and these users, I can even identify the various groups, they have access to sensitive data and applications, right? Even that aside, if I threat model and say, what if attackers have zero-day exploits for things inside of a browser, or they're utilizing browser exploits in some way? I can use the Vicarious platform to help me make that decision about what really is my risk, and then go in and remediate it. And I don't want to say 100% of zero-day exploits, right? But the solution, Topia, will allow me to deploy patchless protection for areas inside of critical applications or most used applications that can provide some protection. Did I capture that correctly, Michael and or Clayton?
Yeah, no, I think you hit that nail on the head. And if you think about the version 1 of that, it was virtual patching, right? If we go back a decade ago, people recognized that patches may or may not be able to be deployed based on any number of business reasons. And so virtual patching was kind of Gen 1 of trying to solve that problem, putting a memory layer between application and attacker. Well, customers tell us that that's not a resource-friendly activity, and that most systems that you deploy virtual patching to today are very bogged down with such a process running. So we do want to bring a next-generation strategy to memory defense. And most memory defense for endpoint today is all rule-based. And as soon as the attacker finds a way around the rule, there's no alarms. You essentially have false negative. You have a situation where memory defense has to evolve, and Vicarious is in a unique position to offer that, because not only do we know what's going on the endpoint and what the likelihood of exploitation is, but we also know how the APIs behave. We know how the binaries behave. We know how the applications are supposed to work. And if the applications can be exploited and there is a patch available that you can't deploy, we want to help you close that gap and deploy new memory protections that disallow exploitation of API and binaries on these systems.
Michael, sorry, did you have comments on that? Excuse me, on that as well?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail in the head there, because the process today of vulnerability management, the vulnerability remediation, let's not talk about vulnerability management per se, is pretty hard. Is pretty hard because the process is long. Okay, so you have the vulnerability scan, then you have you prioritize it or you not prioritize it. Maybe you're going to patch everything, but this is not the case for most of the clients that we are working with. So you have the vulnerability assessment scan, prioritization, then you send it out to the IT team. They're supposed to patch it, and after they patch it, you don't really know if it was mitigated or not. So the process today, even if we're talking about a simple process, we're not talking about automation, we're not talking about any orchestration layer on top of it, it's pretty frustrating, let's call it this way, because you will not know that the vulnerability has been mitigated until you're going to run the next scan. So exactly what you're talking about, the example you described with the Chrome that is running, it's running on the finance department, it's running with computers that the Chrome executables are doing network activity to the DMZ. This kind of policies, this kind of automation attributes is something that we will release until the end of the year. We will have it as part of our product. You will be able to define a policy and automatically tell Vicarious, okay, if this scenario happens, automatically deploy the patch list. Once the patch is out, deploy the patch. Like having all this sequences around patching and threat automated and happening in a way that a human can respond as fast as a system that they're doing it real time 24/7.
Yeah, and another thing to add to that, we do give the customer every opportunity to influence this decision-making process. The customer can build their own tagging, the customer can build their own priority, the customer can define, asset criticality. But what's interesting about this is that the customers see our output and they tell us, well, I don't need to change anything. You guys are better at this than I am.
That's awesome.
So I think the machine-generated data and the correlation, the depth of correlation that we can bring to the table to prioritize based on the endpoint reality and not subjective variables, it's starting to resonate because we're bringing these things to the surface that the customer said, I would have missed that. I never would have gotten that context that I would have needed to know that, this particular issue is actually a bigger issue than we thought it was because the CVSS score may have been very low. And so, the customer didn't include it on their list, but we raised that to the surface and said, hey, Mr. Customer, this may be a 4, but actually for you, it's an 8 because of how you use it. Your temporal and environmental attributes have to be raised so that the CVSS score is sharpened. And customers that's really resonating with them. They're really excited about that. It takes a lot of the manual work where they may have 1 or 2 people, just dedicated to that process. Now it opens up those human resources to go do more value-added things versus, Excel sheets and math, which we can automate.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I like here. And going back to what Paul said about maybe we don't care about attribution. Even if we do care about attribution, this level of detail is what you need. Because if you're healthcare and you know that you're a probable target of the Ryuk ransomware, the folks who use Ryuk. And you look at Ryuk, like that's a very specific set of tools that they use, and most of the times they hit people with that Ryuk ransomware, it's some combination of like Emotet, then TrickBot, then Ryuk, and they come in a certain way, they pull creds a certain way, they pivot through the network a certain way. And when you know those details, and in your vulnerability management tool, you can pull out those specifics, then you can prioritize for that specific threat actor. If the FBI calls you up as they will do with some businesses and let you know, hey, we think you're specifically targeted for this kind of attack. Another thing I wanted to point out, I was looking at some of the screenshots of the tool here, and something that's always bugged me is when these prioritization tools tell you, there's an exploit for this tool. Like if you tell me there's an exploit for an RDP vulnerability, my very first question is going to be, is it denial of service only or is it RCE? Because remote code execution, the outcome is very, very different from denial of service. Like I don't care if my RDP crashes. I care if they can get into the network through it. And it looks like you do pull some of that out with these X tags.
Yeah, we can get as granular as you want in that regard. And we even publish repositories of data on our website where people can research these vulnerabilities and exploitation tactics. So that's actually been a really popular community asset that we've made available. We get hundreds of hits on that on a daily basis. So we even try to publish this kind of information to better the community, but also build it into the tools.
That's
Excellent.
awesome. Closing thoughts from Clayton and Michael, and any announcements that you have coming up for future product releases.
Yeah. So first, I think that we've discussed here the vulnerability management problem, but along the process, we can understand that if you have only the vulnerabilities data, it's something that most of the time is lacking the context, and this is exactly how we sharpen that by adding machine-generated data, by adding exploitation data, by adding a lot of other stuff. But even that, in our opinion, is not enough, because if you already understand the risk, you prioritize it and you validate it. This is the critical action items that you need to do in order to reduce the risk. You also need to have the ability to take action. So from vulnerability discovery, threats, zero-day analysis, everything that we're doing on the threat analysis side, to prioritization, and then to the mitigation part, this is a full platform. And at the end, we're also going to add entire automation layer on top of it for the scenarios that Paul, you said before, around emerging threats that are happening in my network right now, in my infrastructure right now, and I need to take action, but I don't even have the time to wait for my IT analyst or for my security professional to come in the morning and press the buttons. I need it to happen right now. And this kind of response is something that the vulnerability management, the vulnerability remediation process really needs, because the process is just, we're looking at the process from the organizational perspective. So you have two to three teams that focus on this process. You have IT, you have security, and sometimes you also have the DevOps as part of the process. So the process is hard anyway, even if you have the right tools. We're trying to consolidate it and add a lot of value to every silo of the process with very strong automation.
I would follow that with, I would encourage anybody who thinks that they have vulnerability management figured out to check out our zero-day analysis for their applications, binaries living on their endpoints. We've shown people the likelihood of exploitation against things that haven't even been identified yet, and we can show compensating control opportunities there. So I would say even for the most mature customer who has 90% of the equation addressed, the aggressive adversaries are going to keep looking, and they're going to keep digging, and we can help people also understand where those mitigation opportunities live beyond the standard vulnerability management strategies.
Outstanding. Thank you both, Michael and Clayton, for coming on the show today. For folks who want to learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/vicarious. That will conclude Enterprise Security Weekly for this week. Everyone have a safe and happy holiday, and we'll see you next time.